You're watching Bet Safe. We're talking Formula One racing, and of course, Johnny Herbert is with me. We are talking all things Austin, Texas, and moving on to Mexico. We're not talking about tequila here either, are we, Johnny?
No, not yet.
Not yet, not yet. All but done is what people are saying, and it pretty much is, isn't it? The way that he's been driving, Lewis, it's all but done.
And I think that is exactly it. The way he's been driving has been absolutely brilliant. It's been wonderful to watch because he just now seems to be so complete as a driver. Whenever he needs to dig deep in a qualifying session, for example, bang, no problem at all. Always seems able to get that pole position. And then when it comes to the race, always thinking, a little bit of radio communication you hear sometimes where he maybe doesn't agree with what his engineer and the strategists have been talking about. So he sometimes comes across as being a little bit outspoken, which I think is great because that's what he's got to be able to do, think while he's driving. And I think Lewis Hamilton does that very, very well. And I think that's why we're seeing him in very dominant form at the moment.
Constructors gone. Yep. So for Mercedes, job done, really. All but for the fact that he's not quite over the line yet.
No surprise, I think.
No, but I mean, it speaks volumes for Mercedes, doesn't it?
It does. And again, you know, this domination they've had for the last sort of 4 years has been incredible, really, because it's always easy sort of getting ahead of the pack. It's keeping ahead of the pack, which is the real difficulty, and they've been able to do that. They've had the threat from Ferrari this year. It looked as if the fight was really on, and then it completely crumbled in front of everybody's faces, especially when we had the Singapore debacle where that was the driver's fault, Sebastian Vettel's, and of course then it was the team's fault when we came to Malaysia and Japan, and then that was it. The championship was more or less sort of lost for Ferrari, but especially for Sebastian Vettel. It
didn't look like that, did it, about 9 races ago?
Exactly.
And how important was the bump, the Vettel bump on Lewis Hamilton, because that seemed to kick-start things, didn't it, for Mercedes?
You're right, it did in many respects, and that goes back to what I was saying, where they just seemed to be able to sort of continue the development of that car. There were issues Lewis has been outspoken about. Those said they're not going to actually be fixed for this season. It's going to be for next season. He's hopefully going to be able to sort those out. But even so, they were still able to take it to Ferrari, have that consistency there, which I think is something they didn't have at the early part of the season, which Ferrari definitely had. Then it sort of swapped over a little bit more the other way. And I think you've got to say, pat on the shoulder for all the guys who have done a brilliant job back at the factory, but Brixworth, where the engines are prepared as well, because the reliability has been fantastic as well. And that's where Ferrari, sadly, has been the issue. It's been all about reliability, really.
With Ferrari this season, looking back, the more urban city circuits,
yeah,
they sort of took control, didn't they? But for the bigger circuits, that's where Mercedes really took the advantage. True?
I think so. I think there was an element to that. I think aerodynamics was one area that they were definitely sort of struggling in when it was high downforce. That's where the Ferrari seemed to be better off. That's where the Red Bull has probably sort of come back into it as well. So going to Austin, that was a situation where, with the type of corners that you've got and the power that you also need at the same time, and a driver that is driving absolutely brilliant. Once again, at a track, he's been rather successful over the last couple of years. It all just sort of all came together for him, and once again, it was sort of an easy win for Lewis. But we're going to have to wait and see what happens. Obviously, when it comes down to it in Mexico, completely different scenario. We're going from sort of sea level to about 7,500 feet up.
Well, let's not talk about podiums. Let's talk about the biggest bottom lip in Austin, Texas, Max Verstappen. I saw a few interviews afterwards. The whole penalty thing, was he hard done to?
No, I don't think he was, personally. I think, there are track limits. We keep talking about these track limits, that everybody's fed up that when they go off and then they come back on the track, that's not what it's all about, which is absolutely right. There is a white line that runs around the circuit, and historically has always been there. That is your track limits. Going outside those, because of the way the tracks have sort of changed over the years, is not what it's all about. That's not the skill. The skill is to go as fast as you can between those white lines. So then when you get to a scenario that we had, a brilliant drive by Max Verstappen, I think driver of the day for me, it was absolutely brilliant, against Kimi Raikkonen, a very shrewd, experienced ex-world champion. And that right-hander, it was brilliant what he did, Max. Kimi tried to back him up at the left-hander before, then he got the drive out, then you always knew Max was going to have a go for it. But of course, the problem is the curb is so vast and it's flat. That when he went for the inside, and Kimi was very good actually, Kimi gave him a little bit of space and actually did try to sort of, not avoid him, but move away from him when he saw he was there. But of course, all four wheels quite comfortably were way off on the inside, so he's cutting the circuit. Now to me, the excitement was absolutely brilliant. We always know what Max is going to do. You always can sort of have a good sort of understanding of his mindset. So it was brilliant what he did, but it was illegal. It's blatantly outside the boundaries of the track, and we've all been complaining as ex-drivers, as race fans at the same time, that when you go out and overstep the track limits, that's not good. And that was no different what we saw there. I think if it was the other way around, and it would have been Kimi or someone else doing the same thing, you'd be very annoyed if someone had cut the track. Doesn't matter how much it is, you're cutting the track to actually gain an advantage. So I think it was absolutely right that the stewards, I think Mika Salo was the driver's steward, that they gave him a penalty, and it was a 5-second penalty. All it did was just reverse, that podium, and I think it was absolutely right. There was a lot of uproar from other, fans of Max, but he did wrong, and it's something we don't want to see. We want to see these guys race within the track boundaries, and then it's absolutely okay. Has he done that before? Has he overtaken in the track boundaries, Max? Yes, he has. So it's the circuits that are the problem, because they allow it to happen, and they shouldn't do. If there was a little bit of grass there, he wouldn't have done it.
And
because he knew there was youth and sort of using his memory from when he did the track walk to know, well, that place I can cut that. Because if they put it this way, this is probably one way of doing it. If it was qualifying, why didn't he do it in qualifying? Because you're cutting the track. He did it to get the advantage over Kimi.
You wouldn't catch a gentleman of a certain age doing that.
Oh, no, never done that one.
Well, let's look at where they are. The standings then after 17 rounds. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton is at 3:31. You've got Sebastian Vettel. It seems amazing now to say, 2.65 is such a gap.
Yeah.
Now, here's the question. Valtteri Bottas, 2.44. If Lewis is going to run away with this, can Valtteri catch Sebastian Vettel to make it 1 and 2 for Mercedes? I mean, we'll just mention before you answer, Daniel Ricciardo with Red Bull is 1.92, which is, excellent.
Yeah.
Kimi Raikkonen on 1.63. So disappointing season for Kimi Raikkonen, fantastic for Daniel Ricciardo. Can Valtteri Bottas really catch Sebastian Vettel and pip them and get 1-2 for Mercedes?
He should, to be honest. He's got the car to do it. He has got the speed, but it's got to be a little bit more sort of consistent for him and for us as race fans. And he should do now. We've seen the situation of the points lost by Sebastian. Now he's got an opportunity with the remaining races coming his way, where he's been disappointed with his season so far. So if he's been disappointed with his season so far, what does he want to do? He wants to end the season very, very quick. So there's a lot for him to be able to sort of mentally sort of go, this is my time, this is my chance. And I think it is his chance, and I think he's got to take that chance, because I think they don't come very, very often. I think it would be the perfect time for him to be able to sort of up his game, then get himself in that sort of position of being in front of Sebastian Vettel. Is it going to be easy? No, of course not. But that's what this game is all about. So he should do. I hope he does. And I think, he's a good bet, because I think there is a massive chance of that being able to happen, because the mentality of Sebastian, is it going to shift once the sort of championship has gone? Maybe that's where he's going to have a weakness that Valtteri can jump on and get in front.
So with our ponchos on, let's look to Mexico.
Yep.
Everybody is just looking for Lewis to take this title. Is there any chance that he won't?
I think a non-finish is going to be the biggest thing, or a complete sort of mess up at the first corner, where maybe someone's going to come up the inside and maybe take him out, spin onto the grass on the outside there. Then he's going to be further back. Then he's got to race back. But even if Sebastian wins it, 5th is enough. So I think that's where it's going to be a very unlikely event that I think he's not going to sort of capitalise on the championship in Mexico. There's only one issue that we have there. I'll mention about that sort of 7,500 feet or whatever it is altitude that they've got. So the air's much thinner. It's much harder on the turbo, for example, because it just spins up a little bit quicker because there's thinner air. The cars themselves run more or less Monaco downforce as well, because the air doesn't create the same amount of aerodynamic efficiency, let's say, so they can use big wings. Cooling is a big problem as well, because there's not enough density in the air to cool down the brakes, so that's all going to have to change as well. So the cooling is going to be something that's going to be quite important, and it's where that balance is actually going to sort of come. Now, is that a weakness for the Mercedes? In many respects, yes, because the downforce is something they've suffered with. This is a place that you need it. They're not going to be able to have that. They have got the reliability with the Mercedes engine itself, so that's going to be okay. Then there's always been a bit of talk about if it's in traffic, it's always been a bit of a problem. And this one, again, because of that thinner air, is going to be maybe a bigger problem because of the cooling factor, where they're going to have to change the whole sort of philosophy of the car. Everywhere else we go to, sea level effectively, it's not a big deal. But of course it's a very, very different scenario there. So that's the only thing that may be a negative for Mercedes going into that weekend, and maybe it's going to be a little bit more difficult for Lewis. But I think the way he's driving, I don't think it's really going to be a problem. Is he going to go for the race win? I think in his normal mentality, yes, he will do, but he also knows he doesn't need to, and probably the safest bet, this is that sort of smarter Lewis Hamilton I think we're seeing at the moment. He knows he doesn't need to. He just needs to be in that top 5. Job done.
For Sebastian Vettel, what are the difficulties of this track, and what, in that mindset of there's just that last glimpse of any hope, what does he do?
It's a long way away, isn't it?
Well, it is a long way away.
Yes.
What's the race of his life if he were to pull anything off on this track?
Well, again, the only thing he can do is win. There is nothing else will do, effectively. Have they got the ingredients to be able to achieve that? Yes, they have. I think, as I've just spoken about, the difference with the air, and maybe that affects Mercedes more. It's probably going to be better for him and Ferrari. But his mentality, he won't give up. His way is not to just sort of give in before the championship is done, because there are still things that still can happen this coming weekend. There's also things that can happen with the last couple of races that we've got as well, with the engine blowing up like we saw last year in Malaysia, for example. So there are things that happen, but Sebastian himself will go there purely to do the race win. He's motivated enough to do it. He knows the car's good enough to do it, and as I've just discussed, he probably has a bit of an idea that maybe it's a Mercedes weakness for him. So they have probably the upper hand going into the weekend, I think.
You know these guys. Lewis wins it. Say, he takes the podium. What does he say? What does he say to Sebastian Vettel at the end? Is it all with good grace? What do you think? Yeah,
there's respect, and that respect is something I think they've got for each other. I think they've loved the battle that they've had sort of this year. I'm sure they'll be wanting that to sort of continue next year, maybe the whole way through the season itself, where nobody has the problems that Sebastian had with Ferrari and reliability. But I think he would just say, I thoroughly enjoyed this, mate, but I'm number one.
Well, let's look
Full stop.
Let's look at the odds then. For Lewis Hamilton, it's evens. Sebastian Vettel 13-5. Max Verstappen 11-2.
Yeah.
Anything interesting there for you?
Well, I think it's only, again, Max, we've got to say that Red Bull has come on sort of leaps and bounds. We're going to a track, as I said, with the air density being very low. Their aerodynamic package is very, very strong. He would have been disappointed with what happened in Austin itself, but he knows he's driving very, very well at the same time. So the Red Bulls themselves and Max, are going to be a good thing to get behind, because we always know his abilities are one of those very rare abilities where he hangs everything sort of on the line, and he's wanting to get to that line to sort of prove his point, which is exactly what Lewis Hamilton does, to be perfectly honest. He's completely and utterly wanting to prove he's the best, not by talking about it and saying I'm the best. Visor down and does the job, and that's what exactly Max Verstappen does. So I think Max is going to be possibly a very good call coming into the weekend, because I think that Red Bull will work very well. Didn't have a bad weekend last year from what I remember, so I think this is where they're better and more competitive than they were last year. So they're going to be equally a threat. So again, we're back to that sort of 3 teams and possibly 6 drivers who are going to sort of go hammer and tongs at each other.
Well, Johnny, thanks as ever. I think it's tequila time.
It is.
We're leaving Austin, Texas, and as far as I know, did they build that wall? I don't think they did.
No, it may have started. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, anyway, Donald, move out the way. We're coming down to Mexico. You can check out all the latest odds on betsafe.com. And remember, you've got to be in it to win it. Unless there's a wall.
Yeah!